let's give the most tangible roadmap of like, if I'm hearing this and I just want to get started, the first thing you're going to need is extraction, right? So typically this will be Stitch or Fivetran, and it just syncs it to your cloud data warehouse. So this could be Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery. You'll get a trial period with some consumption credits, and then it's very inexpensive at the volume that you'd be doing. That's where DBT comes in, is it lets you do the transformation in the warehouse. I think the biggest last piece is the reverse ETL component, right? Census, high touch. That's what lets you take this data that you transformed into what you want it to do and put it where you want it to go.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Danny Lambert, Director of Marketing Operations at DBT Labs. Danny started his career at an event solutions company where he wore several different marketing hats, including getting his first taste of marketing automation. He then worked in marketing ops at IZEA, a marketplace that connects brands with influencers, before having a short stint at Mega.io, one of the leading Martech and analytics agencies. He then moved over to health tech at CareCloud, where he led demand gen and ABM. And he transitioned to Rev.com, the popular transcription company, where he started in marketing ops, then demand gen, before being promoted to director of integrated marketing. And today, Danny is director of marketing operations at DBT Labs, the creators of the most popular software for data transformation, used by data engineers at more than 20,000 companies. Danny, thanks so much for your time today. Really pumped to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Phil. I've been listening to the show on my morning walks, in the car, commuting to the office now that we're going back in a couple days a week, and really been enjoying it. So excited to be on here. Hopefully share something exciting for your audience.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got a jam-packed episode today. We're going to try to keep it high level for the folks that aren't super familiar with terms like data transformation and building a warehouse-first marketing tech stack. But I think we'll get a chance to dive pretty deep, so the folks that are a bit more seasoned in these terms can still pick up some useful things there. So yeah, let's dive right in. There's this idea of working with data teams that I find fascinating, chatting with different folks on the show. For a lot of marketers, this concept of like a warehouse native, warehouse first approach to building a MarTech stack is pretty foreign. It was foreign to me, like even 3, 4, 5 years ago. A data warehouse, even like as a term, it was this thing described for engineering meetings and shouldn't really be in like a marketing's vocabulary. But times have changed, and I think you'll agree, being at a very data centric company. But I'm curious to start out by asking you, like, what do you think are these like misconceptions that marketers have about working with data and data engineers? Curious your take there.
It feels very akin to working with product in many
Uh-huh.
ways. Like if you talk to a lot of marketing teams, they don't really have a good idea into the product roadmap, how to interface with product teams. And you saw the similar trend with like PLG getting big. It's like, how do we have a shared reality with them where we can start influencing product development to help our PLG motion? And that kind of got better around the same time as this started. Data teams feel the same way to me, is like they feel siloed, they feel inaccessible. It feels like they're hard to interact with because you don't really know how they work, especially for non-technical marketers or ops people. I remember I was going through this myself. Like I was working at CareCloud, like you mentioned, the healthcare company down in Miami, early 2010s. And that was when the warehouse trend was really picking up. And I was hearing it and seeing it everywhere. And I was like, I actually don't understand that thing, right? There's like, you know that it's going on,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
there's actually knowing how to apply it.
Right.
So I went to like a Snowflake event that they hosted in Miami, went down to Brickell, went to their thing, and I sat there for the whole hour while they talked about it with all these data people in the room. And I left with about the same understanding of data warehousing as I went in, right? I was still equally as confused. And I think that is part of why it hasn't been adopted. I think there's kind of like two things are not adopted widely is I think it's hard for marketers and even ops people to understand how to apply it if you don't have an easy way to do it or see it in action. Like
Mm,
seeing data theory lined out with schemas and all this stuff on slides sounds very foreign. But then if you go actually just like set up some quick ingestion, drop something into a data warehouse, like install DBT, and you had like a clear Medium post or like a clear guide, it would be so much more tangible.
yeah.
And that's what I felt like I was missing. And I think broadly in marketing, education is hard to come by, right? You don't know where to go. There's so many avenues. So this feels like a part of our space where there is a lack of education for marketers where it can become tangible. So
Mm,
it's all theory, and then they kind of steer clear of it. I think the other thing that happens with any skill is people feel like they need to ramp really quickly in a new role. And it's kind of the whole you never get fired for buying IBM piece is they come in with things that they've used in their past, they know how to do, they feel like
yeah.
they're on a quick timeline. So they'll default to what they know. And to start to transition into doing something new, like the warehouse first approach, you have to take a step back, make the space to actually understand the trade offs, how it works, and build enough conviction in your idea to go to bat for it.
Mm,
And that can be challenging if you've had all these years of experience doing it a different way and you don't have enough exposure to actually have the conviction to propose that or don't feel confident enough in your proposal that it will work. So that you kind of think it's cool, but maybe a little too far into apply it and getting people to get to that point where they're like, I feel I understand this. I know how to explain it well. And I have enough conviction to say, hey, I think we need to take a little bit of a different approach than maybe we have in the past.
what do you think are like the biggest fears or reasons for like having hesitation to dive back in? Like you had that motivation to go to that Snowflake event. You had the curiosity to just like at least sit in and check that out. Like, do you think that it's that practical element that's so far removed from the theories of seeing like all the data schemas on slides? Like, why do some marketing teams refuse to take that first step?
I think it's very foreign, right? Like a lot of these marketers don't really think as data as maybe a primary role for them. It's something
Hmm.
that should assist them. And to jump into it, the path to learning is not super clear. Even if you ask the people who've learned, all of their avenues are different, right? Some people will
Yeah.
go to like Code Academy and they'll take like SQL courses. Some people will work through mentors who will show them. Some people will luckily have tag alongs like sitting in the same office that they can ask them questions to.
Hmm.
No one really seems to have a very similar path to becoming skilled at this. And I think that's hard, right? Like if you have a limited amount of time to learn something, it'd be helpful to have a path to know, like, if I go through this, I'll come out the other side with this expertise. I think that's improving, right? I think there's some good stuff on Udemy and there's good courses coming up around it, but I think that's probably the biggest hurdle is there like, if I can spend my time keeping up to date on marketing concepts, I probably need to be doing that, and then I know so little about data, maybe it seems like too big of a barrier to
Hmm.
commit time to that. So I think accessibility is a big thing, um, even for people who wanna learn.
Yeah. No, it's such a great point. And the other thing you said earlier too is like, especially marketers earlier in their role, like there's so many things on their plate already, and they have a playbook that they're familiar with. And if I'm putting myself in the shoes of the marketing ops folks listening right now, they're just like, Danny, dude, like we're busy enough and like we're trying to make the most of our marketing tools and we're teaching marketers how to like self-serve themselves. Like we have a backlog that's longer than your average like Costco receipt. Like why should we care about data transformation? Like what do you say to those folks where trying to understand where data transformation fits in all this? Like what's the biggest opportunity you see for marketers for taking that first leap and that plunge into understanding this whole world of data and data transformation?
Yeah, I think my own personal story here, is probably something that people feel is like, I didn't go out very proactively. I went out when the pain got so great, I didn't
Mm,
have an option but to go out and figure
okay.
out an alternative solution, which I think is probably a lot of the ways that people get into this. You hit this point of frustration where you're like, I know this thing is possible, and why is it so friggin' hard to do it? Right? Like as an ops person, you just like everything is possible, and you know that in some way, and some things you're like, this should be easier than it is, and that was the friction point for me.
Mm,
I was at Rev, and we had Segment implemented. We had like all the event capture through there. Like, so we had a good data infrastructure, data capture, and we were working with a multi-touch attribution tool at the time. And I was looking at like what their product gave us, and it was close, but not like exactly what we wanted. There were things that we needed to be different about the way that they reported, the way they structured their data sets to even be remotely valuable for us. It felt very cookie cutter. Like we build this commercial product that has to serve, 10,000 different businesses
mhm.
in exactly the way they want when all of them have very unique context
Yeah.
that isn't related to one another. And I feel like that sentiment alone is people will probably resonate with is like, when you buy something off the shelf that needs to be more custom and it can't be, you get into a really negative space because you're like, I'm not getting the value out of this that I need, but I also don't have another avenue for doing it.
Right.
And right around that time, I was like, this is not rocket science, right? Like what these tools are doing is taking an event stream and putting parameters around what's included, what's not included, crediting. Like it's pretty straightforward stuff
Mm.
when you think about it. And subsequently, we're over here capturing this entire event stream inside of Segment. So I can write like a raw SQL query that does roughly what we're looking to do. And I'm like, we should just create a model around this and do it ourselves and just roll the cost over. And we didn't even really want to do something very complicated, just enough to get us the stuff that we're missing from them. So I went to my data team at the time, which is how I feel like this goes in a lot of orgs. You're like, hey, I'm hoping to do this thing. Like, can we get slotted in your roadmap? And months go by, and it's not a priority. It never will be a priority, right? Because
Classic.
it's competing with everything else
Yeah,
under the
yeah.
sun. So you're sitting there saying out to your leadership, hey, I just need this one thing to do what I need to do. And then you're also going to data team trying to get them to build the thing that you want. And it's just not progressing. So at that time, I went out and I was like scouring the web. And Julie Beynon at the time was at Clearbit, now is at Census. She had a really interesting webinar on YouTube with DBT at the time, Fishtown Analytics, that had like 500 views on it. And it was like, it was meant for me. It was like, how to build multi-touch attribution with DBT. Like,
Nice.
I think that the title was practically that or something like that. And I watched it and it was exactly the thing that had been in my head this whole time. I'm like, I'm technical enough. I know how this data should be structured. And watching her breakdown of that, I was like, this is the future of how marketing teams, all teams are going to work. Like I had so much conviction that that would be the case because everything's getting commoditized now, right? Like AI is making all this content so much easier to produce, like all these workflows so much faster for people. What are like the unique capabilities that you're going to possess? Data has to be one of those things,
Mhm.
right? It allows personalization, it allows segmentation, it allows building informed strategy. And I felt like we didn't have the ability to do that. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, I want to implement DBT at Rev. It was very hard to get that across the board. So I'm like, I'm just going to go straight to the source. I'm just going to go work there and see if, if, and see if my idea of how powerful this is really is true. And like, and the whole drinking your own champagne thing, it drives everything that we do in here.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get into it as we start to go through like how this fits into a marketer operations workflow. But it's truly paramount. Like the difference is insane. The flexibility, the speed that you get to control your own destiny is a lot different than if you're waiting on your data team or subsequently waiting on some vendor that's never going to prioritize the thing that you want them to
Mm.
do.
So many awesome jumping off points there. Like, yeah, definitely love the Julie shout out. We had her early as a guest on the show. It was probably like season one. We were just like interviewing friends that we had in the space, and Julie's local Toronto. I'm in Ottawa, so we're not physically too far away from each other. But like you, similar kind of story. She was instrumental in helping unlock this new like data warehousing world. I was at Close a couple several years ago now, and like we didn't have a data warehouse. It was segments. Most of our data was in segment, and it was completely different than what we were seeing in HubSpot and completely different than what we were seeing in Google Analytics. And I was the only marketing ops guy there, and they were just like asking us, how is our content driving revenue? Like, what is leading to revenue out of all these pieces of content that we're doing? And I was just like, man, I don't know where to get started. Like, there's all these like multi-touch attribution vendors. A lot of them in this space were really good at doing paid ads attribution. None of them were really good at like organic content and like that whole journey from first touch to last touch. So anyway, she introduced me to that world, and yeah, she's the first person that gave me a shout out for DVT though. So it's like we said at the start of the show, such a small world when it comes to like marketing ops and data.
Yeah, Julie's out there doing the Lord's work, keeping us all informed.
And it's cool because like her role now has merged from being the marketing ops person at her previous companies to being like head of data and head of analytics at Census now. So like she has the experience of being in the ops shoes, but now she leads like a bunch of data projects and still does like a bit of everything. So yeah, she she is doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Let's
Shout out, Julie.
yeah, yeah. Let's plug DBT though, because I feel like that's a nice transition. Like DBT is definitely transforming how companies are approaching data, and it's like super well known in the data world. I'd say probably like table stakes. I've never chatted with a data engineer that hasn't at least like heard of DBT. A lot of folks like use it. Do you agree that it's also powerful, like you said, for less technical teams, like marketing ops folks that are definitely a bit more technical than your average marketer? But how can you explain how DBT serves as this like bridge for marketers who are looking to, work more effectively with data and not have to wait months to get their projects on like the data team's roadmap?
Yeah, I kind of feel like the old ETL process and how it was done was very all or nothing, right? You
Yeah.
were either the engineer building it who knew everything about how the pipelines worked, and you were like this one person in a closet somewhere that you need to like get to know and buy them donuts to get your thing to work.
Yeah.
The way that I see it now, having used DBT every day since I've been here, is there's like a permission set, a role for everyone along the life cycle of data, right? Like there are places where people should be plugging in, either to be informed, to be drivers, right? Like there's different seats and different ways to interact. And I'll give you like an example. Say we have a Looker dashboard or a Hex dashboard, whatever BI tool, and there's a metric on that. A lot of times someone will look at that and be like, how did we get to that? Like, what does that mean to us? Is that right? Right? When was the last time this data ran? You have all these questions about
Yeah.
it, and how that would work before is someone would stop and they would ping that person, right? You would go to that data engineer, whoever owned it, or first try to find whoever that is to ask them those questions. So, starting from probably like the least technical person is, say you just want to know how your metrics are defined. Before that was really tough. You can go into any single one of the reports that we publish anywhere in DBT and use Explorer, like our docs capabilities, and say, okay, this metric that I'm looking at is ARR. How is that calculated? Where is this data coming from? Column level lineage all the way back to when that first came out of the warehouse, and every single transformation that happens from raw data through to the thing that you're looking at, the exposure, right? So I'm taking the other approach. I can see we pull this Salesforce data out of Fivetran. Where is every single place that this is exposed downstream?
Mm.
It's in this Looker dashboard. It's in this export from our reverse ETL tool. So I know if we change something, these are all the places that it might break. And
Mhm.
vice versa. If I don't know what the definition of this metric is, I can self-serve myself, any single person in the entire business. It's nuts, right? That level of access is not just executives, it's not just leaders. Every single person, the whole organization can go find out how any one of our metrics are defined on their own without any assistance from anybody else, which to me is like minimum amount. And I'd
Yeah.
say the same thing with like data freshness and all that. And your dashboards, we're able to say this job was last run on this date and it passed, or this job failed. So when people are using it, they don't have to ask if the data is ready. It's like, I know it's ready. I know that this passed all its tests. This job ran at this time. So people have confidence in what they're receiving from the data team without having to interface with them a lot. And then if you go a level deeper than that, there are people who want to be able to do more, like myself. I think all ops people should be relatively technical and progressing more on that spectrum
Mhm.
as we're going along here. It's becoming more and more important.
Yeah.
So for me, I used to have to submit a ticket and wait and then like do that whole process. Now, if I need something changed, I can go into Fivetran or Stitch and I can trigger the port myself, right? I can pull the data right into the warehouse. Then I can go into DBT. I can set up our source files. I can set up our staging models. I can set up our fact models. And then I can submit a PR to our data team. So all they're doing is reviewing all the work that I did
Mhm.
and saying, yes, that looks good, or no, that doesn't look good. And then I can do the same thing for Looker or Hex. You can do the entire full funnel from getting the data out of the source all the way through to your exposures and your dashboards with just a PR. That's like all the interface that you have to have with the data team if you're even remotely good at SQL, which I'm, very average. That would be nuts before. Like
Mhm.
seeing how that actually comes full funnel is wild, because I feel like most teams don't work that way, but it is completely possible. Like that's how
Mhm.
we work internally. And I think the more teams start to get to that level of interaction, as you can just be a receiver through read only and going through Explore, But if you want to take it full funnel, that's where the power is, right? That's how you have the speed and flexibility to control your work in a way that you couldn't when you were beholden to, a data person who's busy or a vendor that doesn't really care about what you want to do with your data.
Hmm. That's super interesting. I feel like there's like an access like component to that discussion. Like I'm sure some marketing folks are listening and they're just like, I would love to be able to have access to Fivetran and like doing that like extraction process or learning how to do it. But there are like some data teams that operate a bit more closed door type of thing where it's like, you know what, like we own those tools. DBT is a data engineering tool. We have the logins for it. We're not going to give it to marketers like, unless they're able to really show the curiosity and the interest and they've taken these courses and like they understand what they're doing, like when they ask that access, like maybe just curious your take there, like what are some of the first like concrete steps that marketing ops teams can take, like that journey that you just explained, like having that familiarity with those tools, like how did you get there? Like how can marketers begin collaborating with data engineers to first of all like get that access or make them feel comfortable that they know what they're doing. But also marketers, like I feel like there's that hesitation that we talked about, like the feeling of being overwhelmed by all the technical details and all the other stuff that data teams are trying to prioritize. Like what advice do you have for marketers there?
Yeah, because I really don't want to downplay the fact that this is DBT, right? This is what we do, so it should be, skids should be greased a little bit more internally because we're,
Right.
we're drinking our own champagne,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if I were someone not at DBT trying to like understand the lay of the land for our organization, I would be like, do we have a cloud data warehouse or not? Is kind of like the triage point initially.
Mhm,
Because if you
mhm.
don't, your starting point is way different,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
have to start the foundation. You have to get buy-in to actually get a cloud data warehouse, set up the entire infrastructure. That's very different than if your infrastructure already exists and you need to get buy-in from your counterparts to plug into that.
Mm,
So if it already exists, uh, I would like meet with the data team and start to understand, what does your infrastructure look like? What cloud data warehouse do you have? Is it Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift? What does your ingestion look like? What does your transformation look like? And start to understand the picture and work with them to get small incremental buy-in, right? Most teams probably would be open to you taking work off of their plate as long
mhm.
as they feel like they have the right guardrails in place.
Right.
And that's kind of what DBT does. It takes data development and turns it more like software development, where I really can't mess anything up, right? You have to review my PR. It's impossible for me to just like blow everything up. And so if you have DBT and you have a cloud data warehouse, like that conversation is probably a lot easier. It's like, hey, I just want to get read only access. And then I
Mm,
want to start getting some development access, knowing that you have the ability to review all of my work before it goes into production.
mhm.
So I think if you have that tech stack already in place, that's probably the easiest way to get there is start to understand their world, start to take a little bit piece by piece. And then all of a sudden, when your requests start turning into PRs versus asks of their team, it's a lot easier to be like, hey, isn't that better than you having to do this work with like very monotonous, pretty simple stuff that I could do myself? I think it's different if you go down that route and you don't have DBT, because then part of it is going to be figuring out how you can get this level of access
Right.
within your existing tech stack. Like there are ways without it, it just makes it a lot easier. That's why it's
Uh-huh.
such a popular tool for people to use is it makes this conversation a lot easier to have.
Yeah.
So that would be it is like if you have all of that tech stack, try to like incrementally take it on. If you don't have DBT, try to like understand the value of DBT, how what we just communicated, and try to get that integrated. The hardest scenario is none of the above. If you don't have a warehouse, if you don't have any of this tooling, I'd start with the quick start guides. So if you go to the DBT doc site, there's quick starts for every warehouse, right? You have a quick start for BigQuery, you have a quick start for Snowflake, for Databricks, and I would start to work on this in isolation. Like learn the skills before you approach the data team,
Mhm.
and set one up. Set up DBT. Go through our DBT Learn. If you spent 2 weeks on it, you would be proficient enough to have a conversation with the data team and kind of talk through what you want to do, and especially if you're in the early stages, like the earlier you get the warehouse set up, the more valuable it's going to be for you. Like as you start adding more sources, you want that to compound. You don't want to back build everything because it becomes a meaningful amount of work. So I would try as quickly as possible to build up to buy-in for a warehouse if you don't have one, and show this kind of process. Uh, and hopefully we talk about like the outcomes that you want to accomplish too, because I've mostly talked about how it benefits us as the employee.
Hmm.
You have to be able to communicate how it benefits your stakeholders in the
Yeah.
GTM org.
Hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%. We'll link out to those resources, those quick start guides, because I feel like that a lot of folks listening like might not live in this world where they have a warehouse first approach. Like maybe there is a warehouse, but it's used for storage. It's not used as like that 360, or it's not used to power marketing or any GTM teams, right? So like what advice do you have for those folks that are in that, like, let's take those baby steps, the first steps towards actually leveraging that warehouse first approach? What advice do you have on things like team structure or computation considerations or tooling investments? Like there's so many of those like first initial decisions that, if you're doing this for the first time, you're likely kind of guessing as you're going here. So would love your advice there.
I maybe hit on team structure first,
Okay.
because I think even internally, it's taken a while for us to get to the right way to work with the data team, because there
Hmm.
will be a point, and hopefully often, where you have projects that are too complex for you to be doing
Yeah.
yourself, right? You're still going to need a very skilled data engineer, very skilled analyst. An example, we have a couple examples that for us is like when we built our internal marketing attribution, when we built our prospecting command center, when we built um, a lot of the stuff for our ABM motion, it was beyond the skill set that I had. And it was like, how do we get these larger, more complicated projects moving along in addition to the smaller stuff that I can do? And those are the ones that I've traditionally had a harder time making progress on, because it requires multiple different people from across the org being aligned on pretty meaningful bodies of work that we need them to do. So what we've spun up internally are pods, functional specific pods. We have a marketing pod, a revenue pod, EPD pod. Each one of them has the key constituents of our bigger initiatives. So we have one data engineer, one data analyst, ops support, finance support, and BSC, which is business systems like Salesforce and integration. And we prioritize multiple quarters out those bigger initiatives that we want to do. And we'll say, hey, we're going to be doing measuring expansion this quarter, or, preventing spam, or regionalized cost allocation, like whatever the projects are that are larger and weedier, getting everyone aligned. Like, yes, these are the right things. These are the people that need to work on it. And this is how we're going to work cross functionally on these bigger things. And that has worked well, because the small stuff is super valuable, but often where most of the gains are going to come from are progressing on these larger projects that then
Hmm.
enable you to do these smaller things on your own.
Right.
So maybe you don't have all of that resourcing, but I'll try to work towards something like that, where you're not coming out of the blue asking for big things, right?
Hmm.
You are talking on a regular basis and building alignment with people who have shared interest with you. And that's why I think the functional pods are important, because it's really tough to prioritize, an EPD ask versus a finance ask versus a marketing ask. Like in those respective functions, people have things that are most important to them. And each function should be able to get the things that are most important to them done without it being compared to the most important thing to another area.
Hmm.
So if it's like, oh, we're just constantly prioritizing
Yeah.
EPD because this is product work and like customer facing stuff, your things may never get done. So having independent ways to make those decisions on what your functional areas priorities are and get them done, and have functional expertise, like a data engineer and analyst that specifically work on marketing will be able to work 4 times faster than someone that has to jump across all these other areas. So that to me is one of like the biggest unlocks that we've had, is making sure that support system exists in that way, so that you don't build all this infrastructure and still not have a way to get decisions done. Like how you make decisions and how you do work are as important as the tech infrastructure that you build.
Hmm.
Um, on the tech side is like, if you're just getting started, start with your most important use case that's within reason, right? Like it's easier to apply things when it's not theoretical of like, we could do all of this stuff. It's like, I really need this thing. For us, that was multi touch when I found DBT in the first place. It could be anything, right? It could be feeding stuff into AI. You need to clean data sets that you can actually run your AI on it. Whatever it is, like find that one thing that you're like, this use case matches what we're talking about, and just focus on knocking that down. Because then once you take something full funnel, you like, take that data, you drop it in a warehouse, you clean it up, you get an exposure, like then you have it under your belt. Then it's rinse and repeat. So trying to just find that and find best in breed tooling along that, because it's really not that complicated to read like 10 posts and realize like what your stack should look like roughly. It's the same 4 tools, different plug in a different vendor here, but same 4 or 5 tools. Just pick one, get started, test it, get one win under your belt, and then expand from there.
Awesome advice. Really appreciate that. Yeah. And definitely echo with the instead of spending like a couple of months deciding which vendor to pick, like just try one. Like a lot of them have very approachable price entry points to be able to just like play around and get started and get your hands dirty.
We have a few great days planned, and we cannot wait to dive in.
The vision is to set the standards for what it means to be in marketing operations.
What we're doing in this conference, we're actually shaping the future of our profession.
There's such an opportunity here. It's all of you who are going to be the leaders making that real.
What we need to do is focus on data analysis, research.
But I think like on this path to the warehouse first approach, or, I've chatted about this topic of composability, like building a composable Martech stack with different folks on the show. Like there's a lot of obstacles along the way, right? Like there's definitely like some gotchas that you realize when you're troubleshooting and you can't figure out where the issue is when you have like 4 different tools that you're using on the application side. But like in terms of those obstacles to getting to that composable tech stack, like how would you say DBT and data transformation helps you with those common obstacles?
Data confidence is the number one risk of composability, in my opinion. And I also think people maybe have the wrong perspective on what composable stack really means. Like I've listened to a bunch of your other episodes, and some people like it has to be composable or it has to be not composable. And that's like a very black and white statement.
Yeah.
Is like to me, the benefit of composable is having the choice, right? You can always buy a packaged solution, but you can't always not buy one if your data is not good enough. Right. Like in that situation with the attribution vendor, I can always just buy them, right? Like I can still go that route, but I also want the option to not if I think there's a competitive advantage for not doing so. And when I look across our tech stack, there's just shit you're not going to build, right? We're not going to build an event solution like Visibo. We're not going to like rebuild like an email marketing platform. Like some of the stuff you'll never build in-house and some of the stuff you'll never buy in isolation, but you want the flexibility to say, this best in breed tool that's not packaged would be way better if we picked that thing than if we went with the add-on product that our current vendor supports. And as things become much harder to like stand out in the marketplace, you need that ability, right? If you see all of the autonomous SDR stuff, like if I'm in the space right now, I'd be trying to find ways to leverage the shit out of that, right? Like, and none of those things integrate. None of those things are like packaged solutions. You need to have this like really enriched event stream with all of this valuable data so you can just feed it to it and take off. And then if you don't, the first part of this is like building up all of the data set that you need to actually make the tool valuable. So that to me is the number one hurdle here is the level of data quality and confidence that you need to get to truly be composable is pretty high. You need a good data engineering team. You need good data best practices. Like it can't be you spin this up with no nomenclature best practices, no standards, like no documentation. You really need to know that what you have built is as high confidence or more than what some packaged solution will do by default. And then once that exists, the flexibility and speed is the benefit of composability. Can I get a competitive advantage from picking a different tool? Can I do something that tool could never do because they can't support what we want. And that was like segment in the beginning for us. I was like, this is really great. And then we got to the limits of what was available with personalization through their tools. Like if it wasn't in their integration the right way, you'd spend all the time building these custom like HTTP scripts to try and make the integration that doesn't exist do what you want it to do. And I'm like, this isn't great. I can't, this isn't what we want to be doing.
Yeah. No, totally agree. I think that the flexibility, the ability to choose is what makes the composability argument really favorable. And yeah, I love your point about the autonomous SDRs, or like insert any autonomous like upcoming technology. Like you can spend 3 or 4 years waiting for your package solution to integrate that after R&D and implementation. Or you can work on your data and make sure it's in a good spot where you can plug and play a couple of these upcoming startups that have something workable already, like many years ahead of your package solution. And you can be ahead of the curve and actually like try to play around with some of that stuff. So I love your point there, but there's, yeah, like a lot of obstacles to getting there for sure. And like, I feel like you broke down some really good, like components there, and maybe we can unpack some of those, like for the marketers that we haven't lost yet, so far in the episode. I want to dive in a bit deeper on some of those terms. Like, you kind of talked about this already, but like better taxonomies, collaborating on data models, understanding reverse ETL, like all of these more foreign terms for your average marketer or ops person. Once a marketer starts collaborating with their data teams, like they're often faced with these technical decisions and they go into research mode, which is fine. But like, how can marketers ensure that they're building a strong foundation from an event capture practice to data models and setting themselves up for success with data transformation tools like DBT?
Yeah, a good point is like, let's give the most tangible roadmap of like, if I'm hearing this and I just want to get started, what does that actually look like for me? And that's just a combination of a couple tools. I'll list some vendors just so like it helps with research. I don't want to be like, I prefer this one over this one. Like make up your own minds or pick whichever one's the easiest for your budget, right? If one of them's a free tool, start with that. Like get something if you don't have something already going. But the first thing you're going to need is extraction, right? So typically this will be Stitcher 5tran. And all this lets you do is just go in there, connect your integrations for whatever tool you want the data from, and it just syncs it to your cloud data warehouse. Then obviously you'll need a cloud data warehouse. So this could be Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, Databricks, any one of these. If you go to those quick start guides that we talked about, all of them will allow you, I think BigQuery is probably the most flexible in this, will allow you to set it up with low to no cost, right? You'll get a trial period with some consumption credits, and then it's very inexpensive at the volume that you'd be doing. It's like, don't worry too much if you're just getting started and just want to test this out around cost. Like, I don't know exactly what 5tran or Stitch are right now, but not super expensive. The warehouses have, free to very low cost ways to get in. So set up the extraction, dump it into your data warehouse, and essentially have just a raw table of data, like in the rawest format possible. That's where DBT comes in, is it lets you do the the transformation in the warehouse. So it'll reference the raw tables that you have dropped in there, and you can join these together with basic SQL. Like that's one of the benefits of DBT, and it's not like you're writing custom Python, like stored procedure scripts. You're just writing SQL. So if you have base level SQL, you're great. If you don't, maybe like brush up on a little bit of SQL. You probably want to know that, that anyway.
Or ask ChatGPT for some help.
Yeah, just be like, hey, write me a script that does this. And you can just do basic things, right? Like just select these 4 columns, clean the name, just to get like familiar with what it is. And then once you have that, I think the biggest last piece is the reverse ETL component, right? Census, high touch. That's what lets you take this data that you transformed into what you want it to do and put it where you want it to go. Right? Like having it sit in the warehouse in isolation is not the end result of that. Then someone will have to go in there and write the query on it. It's usually, I'm going to feed it to a BI tool. I'm going to feed it to some operational platform, or I'm going to feed it into an AI model. That's like typically the avenues that you have afterwards. So a lot of the common use cases, like I want to do very complex segmentation and personalization of my tools, right? You just create that audience inside of your reverse ETL tool that's based on the model you just built, and you pass it down to whatever tool you want it to be in. Or if you're using Looker or Hex, you can just reference that DBT model directly or Tableau and then visualize it in your BI. So those are kind of the four primary pillars that you need. And there is a free or very close to free version for everything in one of those steps. So I wouldn't let that be a barrier. I think probably the biggest barrier to entry is not knowing SQL. So if you don't know it, I'd probably get started. And then if not, just use one of those quick start guides and kind of work your way through that process. And it compounds very quickly, right? Once you've done it once, the second time is half as long. The third time is a quarter as long. And next thing you know, it's like, wow, how did I ever work any other way than this?
Very cool. I really appreciate the practical nature to that. Like there's so many other tools that kind of come into play as you're kind of like scaling this and getting deeper, but those kind of 4 foundational elements allow any marketer that, you know, can get their hands into some SQL stuff, like at least do the extraction, the storing, the transformation, and then the activation. I think it's what the reverse ETL tools are calling it these days. The other question that comes to my mind, like once you get into like deciding that this is what you want to build, this is the path, maybe you've got buy-in from a couple different folks on the data team and across different teams on the product side. What does that like path to migration look like in your opinion? Like the theory sounds amazing. We want to have all this flexibility and these like best of breed solutions, but we're stuck with this like spaghetti mess or like this Frankenstack, and you know, actually putting a plan together and migrating to this new theoretical version is theoretical right now. Like when we actually break it down into doing the work to migrate to that situation, it becomes an even harder sell. Like what migration tips do you have for integrating the new approach with like the existing workflows and like the Frankenstein mess that some folks might be dealing with this idea of like ensuring that marketing teams can move quickly without constantly like having to rely on data when this is kind of like all built and done with?
Yeah, I guess it just depends on your maturity, right? Like if you have a
Yeah.
really large, mature Franken spaghetti mess or whatever you called it, you might want to consider using some sort of migration partner
Yeah.
to help you. Just calling that out because some of these projects are already quite large and very messy.
Yeah.
So if that resonates with you, that's probably the easiest path. But I kind of see that most organizations aren't really that way. It's not like they have it set up very formally elsewhere. It kind of seems like they don't really have it set up very well, and they're relying on a bunch of isolated tools to make these decisions. What I think is the most important before you start is like getting the taxonomy right with the data team and letting them lead that dance. It's like once we start using it, how does this flow downhill and how do we want to structure it? So like for us, and there's a lot of this in the docs, being like, once you drop in raw data, what are the steps that have to go to take raw data to an exposure, right? Usually we'll do staging and we have nomenclature for like what happens at that step, right? You're just selecting the fields you want for the raw data and you're cleaning them and nothing more, right? And then the next step will be if you're creating an intermediate model or a fact model or a dimensional model. It's just the same thing with like UTM campaigns for marketing. You need to know how that thing is going to be structured in all circumstances so that the data works. If someone's just doing this ad hoc and doing their UTMs in ways that don't make sense, the end output of it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And the structure of your data schema is the same way. You need to know how it's going to flow from what you take out of the tool to what is ultimately going to get used downstream. So starting with them on those foundations is really important. And then tackling the biggest like data products first. If you look at your consumption, right? If I go into our BI tool and I sort our BI tool usage in descending order of runs, you got the 80-20 rule like you do everywhere else, right? There are data sets that people are using every single day. And there's stuff that seems important when someone asks you a really pressing question, but doesn't really get used very often. So prioritizing it in that order is like, what is the stuff? Is it pipeline? Is it revenue? Like that everyone needs to see because you get the most buy-in by delivering the best thing first that's used the most often. So figure out whatever that is for your team and start there. The first win should be the most used thing. Us, it's like our customer 360 dashboard. So if I were to have nothing and start over again, we'd start with customer 360. Then we move to our pipeline reporting. Then we move to our marketing funnel. Then we move to our prospecting command center. I know that. I know that's what the people use the most. And that's the approach that I would take with this is serve the most important use cases first, get buy-in, and then it won't be very hard from there to slowly work your way backwards. But if you try to tackle everything at once, it'll be pretty difficult.
Yeah, yeah. If you tackle everything at once, maybe go with a third party or get an agency that does
Yeah,
this every single day, or they do 100 plus migrations per year. Like, you might as well invest some of your dollars that routes. Definitely echo.
1000%. Yeah, if you have that buy-in where it's like, we are doing this and we're doing it at a large scale, that is
Yeah,
definitely
do
the way
it.
I would go.
I was gonna ask you about like the payoff of warehouse first, but I feel like you answered that already with like some of the most important use cases, like that 360 dashboard and like the pipeline dashboard. But maybe a couple more that come to mind, like for all the folks that succeed in pitching this and they go through the migration and now they finally have, some of these pieces in place where you could call their stack a warehouse first approach. Like, what's the true reward of adopting this approach and working more closely with your data team? Like, how does this change marketing's ability to deliver like personalization or effective campaigns or 360 dashboards? Like, what are the first payoffs that come to mind?
Flexibility is number one. Like, you don't have a lot of dependencies on other people. I'd say it's like the main area that we end up finding dependencies with that current modern stack is when your extraction tool doesn't support the integration that you want to use. But that's like probably the one use case where we're like, this takes a little bit longer if we need to, call someone's API manually and set up a script to do that. But that's pretty few and far between today. Like, you have to be using some pretty obscure tools. But it's just insane, the flexibility, right? Because once you have this in here, I'll give an example for personalization since you messaged it, is like, we have all of our models, they're all related, and they're all exposed in our reverse ETL tool. So you can just go in there and build any audience you want across any data set in the whole business. You can say, I want customers that churned last year that only had 2 active seats and have also been to our website in the past 5 days. Can you imagine that SQL query? Could you imagine if someone asked you to like do that level of personalization? You'd have to know fundamentally all of those different things and how they relate to each other. And if they can, that's what a lot of people have, is like, actually, I don't have a way to get to that grain.
Right.
Because you've done all of the work up front, all of those things are related. Every time you build it, because you built that flow we were talking about, that taxonomy, how this should work, these things are related. You can just go into the audience builder tool and go to any grain that you want and pass it to any tool that you want. If I want to send it to Pendo, if I want to send it to HubSpot, if I want to send it to Mutiny, it's going to get there, and it's going to get there accurately because we've done all the tests. We run all these jobs. We know that data is correct and people can use it with confidence. That's nuts, right? Like, that was what I was talking about with the segment thing, is I might be able to get one of those grains, but I can't get all of that information unless I intimately know how to write these really custom SQL queries, or I just like join it together with a bunch of crappy like Excel spreadsheets. So having that capability is insane, right? It really cuts down on it. The other thing for me though is like having the option to build. Like I gave that example with the multi-touch attribution. We built that whole thing in-house, but the two that are probably really relevant recently is campaign reporting and what we call our prospecting command center. You have like a lot of these companies out there right now pitching being like the source of truth for your sales team prospecting. But when you go to use them, they're actually not that good compared to what you can do yourself, because they're limited in what ingestion they have for specific data sources. They're limited in how you can aggregate that, how you can integrate it downstream. So we're like looking at these couple of vendors, we're like, we can probably do that better with what we have. So we essentially built an event stream of anything that anyone has ever done ever in order. And we feed it into our own internal dashboard. So if I'm a rep, I can say, show me my territory, my accounts that are shared customers with this partner that have been on our website in the last couple of days and are surging. And it'll be boom, like they're at their fingers across every event, dark social, community, you name it, everything ever. And that is a super valuable thing to be able to do, because then you can just take that and feed it to a machine learning platform. Be like, this is a clean data set on everything. Let's start trying to figure out relationships between one another, right? You've already kind of done the pre-work for something else that you might want to do. And that's what those tools aspire to be, right? Is just a very long string of events and who did them, and you layering on your business logic on top. now that's possible. Same thing with Campaign 360 is people use like Salesforce campaign reporting still. It's like, but then how are you tying that campaign back to the web traffic that drove, to the email performance that drove, to your cost data directly from your accounting system versus manually applying it, right? You want the full scope of what a campaign did, not just the number of ops that it influenced in Salesforce. So and I can send you a link afterwards if you want to share this with your audience, because we did like a DBT on DBT session around it, as we joined all those concepts together by starting with nomenclature, right? A campaign is going to be named the same thing in our ad platforms as it is in our UTMs, as it is everywhere. And we use that as the unique identifier to join all of it together: email, web, in-product performance, everything that we care about a campaign, not just how much pipeline it drove, is now in a dashboard where someone can come in and say, show me everything that this person on our team ran in the last quarter, and get every metric for it.
Damn.
Show me just this specific type of campaign, right? Like the flexibility that you get is as good as you are with taxonomy and as good as you are with planning ahead. And that's a real competitive advantage. Like no one that you buy is going to be able to support that level of flexibility. It's just your ability to understand how it needs to work systematically to take advantage of it.
So cool. There's so many jumping off points there. We're running on time, but like what you're describing as this like prospecting event log, almost like allowing your sales team and the SDRs to see all of that granular touch points. Like it's almost giving away what the multi-touch attribution, like that path to conversion, ultimately like summarizes into like a couple of data points based on the aggregation, but you're just like unaggregating that and giving it the raw stream, and like, this is all of the shit that this person has done. Go crazy and personalize your outreach now, instead of sending something super lame and unpersonalized.
Exactly. And that's the autonomous BDR thing, is how do you support that? Right. I don't know if you've played around with any of these tools. I'm not speaking poorly on them. They're all just very new.
Yeah.
Is most of them, they say, we do contact identification, we do intent identification, and we do like personalization across LinkedIn and email. But then when you look in, their contact sourcing is very basic, right? It's like company size and industry. And then the intent sourcing is unbelievably basic, right? It's like only the couple of integrations that they've been able to piece together since they've been alive for 8 months versus if you just fed all of that into Clay, right? You're like, I know everything ever, so why don't we just feed it into Clay and use that context, or, whatever tool you want to use. You're starting with all the information, and then you kind of use them again as the activation layer versus the enrichment or sourcing layer, which I think is how people really take advantage. If you own the data and you use the activation layer to do real-time LinkedIn outreach or real-time personalized SDR email, that I think is where people should aspire to get to, depending on what resourcing you have.
Yeah. And like you said, like that, having that clean, fresh data just gives you so much more flexibility into playing around with all these other tools that are up and coming and doing cool stuff, instead of waiting for your package solution to come out with that new feature in 5 years from now. Danny, this has been super fun. Really appreciate your time. I feel like there's just a bunch of other jumping off points that we could dive into here, but I got one last question for you. You're obviously a technical marketer. You're at a super cool data company. You're also a real estate fanatic and a DIY contractor at home, also a motorcycle fan. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? But how do you also balance all the things you have going on while staying happy at work and at home?
I mean, something that I respect about people, because it's not me, is their ability to just do the job that they do all the time, right? Like they leave work and then they find comfort or peace in expanding on their knowledge outside of work in continuity, like in perpetuity. I can't do that. Like I enjoy that stuff as well, but I need a break, right? I need an escape. And those are kind of my avenues of that for me. Is I like investing in real estate. It's mentally stimulating. I learn new things. It helps me build my portfolio, whatever. Like it gives me a sense of accomplishment, but it gives me a different look than what I'm doing all day long. And I've always kind of been an adrenaline junkie, so I need a fair amount of that, right? Motorcycles, BJJ. I need to get my heart rate up. I need to get my mind off of work. And then DIY is like, I feel like each one of those things for me brings a different type of mental peace. One is very stimulating, DIY. I really have to slow down, right? Like I need to be very intentional, measure twice, cut once. Like it forces you to do things the right way, think about it in a very slow, controlled environment. And then on the flip side of that, like I get my energy out in jujitsu and motorcycles. So for me, it's having those escapes, right? I can't personally be at work all day and be at work all night mentally and find a place to come back engaged every day. I need a way to be able to get out of that cycle when I want to and be in it when I need to. Like if there are some times where you are working on a new project and you just need to be doing that in the evenings, that allows me to stay refreshed for when I need to do those things, but not doing it all the time because that's personally unsustainable.
Yeah. No, I love that you use the word escape. Like I had a full deep dive episode on like what is healthy escapism because it gets such a bad rep. Like escape just basically means that you're trying to like run away from real life and run away from your problems, but it's really just like giving you a chance to breathe and like reset and put your mind to different stuff so that when you go back to those other things, you're refreshed and energized. And yeah, like we had Scott Brinker on the show last year, and he's like a unique human because his answer to this question was like, after a full day of working on Martech and marketing
I
automation,
like to work on
I come
Martech.
home, I sit on my sofa, and then I start reading about Martech. And maybe that's why he's the godfather of Martech, because it's definitely not for everyone.
It's funny you mentioned that episode because that's who I said in mind when I like some people are that, but it is not me. It is Scott. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I think that's interesting too. And I know we're almost at time here is like thinking an escape is negative. If you were on vacation all the time, you would need an escape from vacationing all the time, right? Like you can't just sit on a beach for 8 hours a day and be like, I'm going to sit on the beach for 24 hours a day. Maybe some people can. Like an escape is relative to the context that you're in. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. I think like you just can't do the same thing 24 hours a day, every day and expect to still be excited by that thing.
Yeah. You could probably convince me to just do my census work from the beach most of the day, but depends on how good your hotspot is there.
Yeah, that'd be pretty compelling.
Yeah. Appreciate your time, Danny. This is super fun. We'll share out links to the quick start guides for those warehouse for a lot of folks that are just kind of like me a couple of years ago or just really getting into this space. Really appreciate you taking the time and allowing us to dive deep, but also giving us a nice like intro to the space here. I think is a super fun episode, and you're obviously a leader in this space here for all the upcoming ops folks. So appreciate your time, man. This is super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Phil. This is great.